they're not, definitely not for everyone. And this produces this situation where fast fashion produces sort of, a sort of a fashion fear in a sense, that is sort of amplifies an idea that, am I okay, is this okay, does it look okay, whatever. And I think this really interesting of sort of, in technologies in a sense too, looking at sort of how Lookbook, I don't know if there's some follow Lookbook, but when it came a few years ago, it seemed like, wow, this is kind of nice, people can sort of, take everyday photos of themselves and sort of tag it, and you have friends sort of hyping you, whatever. And then you just realize very quickly how that whole system is totally run by a few people that can sort of change clothes every day. So I don't know if they sort of have connections to, endless wardrobes, so perhaps they work in a fashion store and just borrow those clothes. I have no idea. But sort of, the same mechanism that perpetuates big fashion actually then just sort of seeps into the popularity of sort of a street fashion forum like Lookbook. So it didn't become an alternative at all. You can see things like Etsy, things that have been happening in the same sense. That from the beginning it was an idea that sort of autonomous, independent making could be something. I can just sit here and crochet my owls. And then suddenly it just sort of becomes an industry in itself, that you realize that sort of the whole paradigm of industrialism just sort of moves into sort of, that type of making. Also, another problem of that, you can say, is also that Etsy perfectly highlights the problem of whose hands are allowed to craft. Whose hands does it have to be American hands in order to sort of sell a crochet owl for $20? Or is an overseas, it's a poor Indian hand allowed to cost as much? Which hand is allowed to have a certain price? Whatever. So you can also say that even at Etsy, is sort of an imperialist, racist sort of discourse in a sense, sort of seeping into making, which also sort of what was first thought as a sort of forum where we could escape sort of capitalism or whatever. It's sort of just sort of is drawn back in. So what happens with this sort of fashion fear? I'm interested in these concepts of Johann Galtung, a German peace researcher, who's perhaps most famous for sort of coining the idea of structural violence. But he also added, he has several levels here. So he meant that sort of violence is not, there's a difference between violence and being violent. I can close that door very violently, but I can also close that door very, very non-violently and throw away the key and let you all starve to death in here. But it's not, so I can still be violent, violence can still exist even though the action itself is not violent. So the idea that structural violence, it may not be violent on us, but it's still a structure that sort of, suppresses us, or, is part of a system that sort of, brings us into submission. And the idea here is that cultural violence is these ideas, it's like these narratives of culture that legitimizes different sorts of violence. And I think especially then coming back to fashion, just take a movie like Bling Ring, or you can go back, so many movies are about sort of transformation, I am a poor loser. I don't have any friends, my life is miserable or whatever. And then finally, I have a credit card and I can just buy all these clothes. And suddenly I become like a pretty woman or something, rodeo drive, everything is nice. Or like Bling Ring, suddenly I become popular and beautiful, I can dance all night, whatever, all these sort of things. So, and even if that transformation talks about, a success story, it also implicitly also acknowledges that, being poor and not dressing up like being fancy is a loser status, So basically, if you cannot keep up to the game, you are a loser, So you have to sort of, be part of the game and sort of transform yourself according to these standards. Structural violence is then sort of sewn into the seams themselves, so that there's sort of a material aspect of this, that certain garments just does not fit certain bodies, for example. That you can go into these fancy stores and, I'm sorry, but at Chanel we only sell the petite French woman or something like that. I may not fit there, or my body may not fit in that standard. And then, of course, it also comes into sort of a direct violence that between, I can come to this club and the bouncer says, no, you can't get in with that clothes or whatever, So actually, these garments, these structures are actually enacted on a very direct local level between two persons. So you can actually feel it sometimes, in a certain sense, exactly, when you're sort of rejected at the door or something like that. But there's another sense of this too, which is a term from Daryl Wing Su here at Columbia, talking about microaggressions. And this is mainly sort of a discourse coming from racism studies. But the idea basically is that the very blatant comments about you or whatever, derogatory terms are not as hurtful as the sort of the small, seepy ones from well-intended people. You know, that if the Nazis are marching out here, that's, you know, we know that they're idiots. You know, but it's worse when someone says, you know, in sort of good intent or, you know, well-intended that, you know, that was a very smart comment you said, because all you others, you know, or, you know, all other people are stupid, you know, but you are the great exception. And I feel, you know, if I would say this, I feel like I'm making a compliment, and that person feels, oh, is this a compliment, or is it actually sort of, you know, it's just putting down on me. And I think fashion is full of these type of ambiguities, you know, that a comment like nice shoes, what does that actually mean? Well, if you know, so spell it out, it seems like it means nice shoes. But of course, everyone knows that that does not always mean what it says it means, you know. And I think fashion is always, you know, everyday small fashion enactments like this is all about sort of positioning people, you know, about comments about, you know, that if you have a new haircut, the worst comment you get is perhaps no comment at all. You know, people just look away, you know, and then, you know, shit, this is really bad, you know. So, you know, it's all about, you know, that these type of micro are the ones that really affect us. It's not so much that you are ugly, get out of here, but it's these kind of small, and also how comments about clothes are usually used for sort of bigger issues. You know, I don't like you because you're poor. I don't like you because you're colored, or something like that. But we say it, but I don't like your sweater. Or, you know, we say something like that, but it actually means a totally much worse thing than actually something about the sweater. So the idea here is that, you know, when fashion becomes so everyday and so saturated and so accessible, that this actually brings much more things. So when we talk about democratization, it actually brings in a sort of, you know, a sort of a sneaky thing that we perhaps did not want when we talk about democratization. You know? So it really, you know, how do we become, you know, how do we become more careful about what this democratization means, and when we make these kind of things accessible? I've been trying to play with this. Now a year ago here at Parsons, I started a project called The Current State of Fashion, where I tried to sort of look at, you know, what if fashion was a state, a national state, you know? What sort of state would it be? Well, it would hardly be a democracy, would it? You know, it's not really that because sort of voting to Karl Lagerfeld, no, we want flare jeans, or, you know, we want more batik, or whatever, you know. No, that's not what's happening. You know, fashion is very much not so democratic. You know? They may call it democratic in the sense that more people can access it by buying stuff, but in the control of the system, of course, there's nothing like it. You know, of course, it's still very sort of run in a very, very top-down way, and we can say, I mean, yeah, exactly. And so whatever, I tried to sort of find a way to discuss this. So I produced a little passport office. I produced passports and stamps and things that you could apply for a passport to become, get a visa into the current state of fashion. It was at the Fashion Week in New York here a year ago. And and also, so this is the visa form where some of the questions come from the US visa form, so that, you know, were you ever a member of the Nazi party between 1933 and 40? You know, if you fill in, but yeah, if you come here, you know, you need to fill in, are you entering the United States in order to overthrow the state? You know, these kind of serious questions. And I mixed in sort of, you know, did you ever wear tie-dye, or, you know, these kind of things. And, you have to fill in your size and things here. I also produced sort of, brochures and things about sort of from tourists, you know, that you come here and you can travel here, but you just have to get a passport. And then I set up a temporary passport office in the entrance of Parsons, where we filled in these and people had to sort of apply and get rejected. No, quite a few actually got, but I was too kind, as I was sort of the industry. But whatever. But trying to sort of, you know, so what mechanisms could we have to actually discuss these type of, you know, can we discuss fashion as a state in order to highlight what fashion actually does to us? You know, who controls fashion? Is there a constitution? Who has the right? Who are we the people in fashion? Or is there such a thing? Or whatever, you know. Trying to sort of apply that type of thinking into a fairly sort of abstract system as fashion. So that brings us into hacktivism then, because this is sort of, you know, if this is sort of the part of the power play in a sense, what is sort of the subversion of this, and what other ways is there to sort of come around this? And part of my thesis was sort of starting from the Make magazine's slogan, sort of, you know, if you can't open it, you don't own it. And this idea that more and more stuff we own today, we don't have access to. You know, if you install Linux on your iPhone, the warranty actually, you know, whatever, you know, you're not really, you're abusing it, and you may be even sued, perhaps, you know. At the same time, more and more stuff don't have screws anymore, and you can't open them. And also, user-friendliness comes in here too, because, you know, as long as your PC looked like a real gadget, you know, sort of very technical, it was sort of, you know, you just sort of figure out that there was stuff in there. But look at sort of a contemporary Mac, you know, it's like totally sleek, and it has this light of you know, almost like it's alive, and you don't want to sort of cut it because blood might come out of it or something. You know, it's like, but you know, it's trying to be something totally, you know, organic. It's something else. It's so user friendly. It doesn't, you know, you don't get a manual or anything for it. You know, the whole idea is that it's your friend. You know, you just open it and welcome. You know, something like. But you know, that it does. You know, the whole idea is that you should not interfere with it. You should not open it and sort of dig into it because you know it might die or something. That's the idea. So you know, so what is our role in relation to these sort of black holes, black machines, whatever we call these sort of that you cannot open, you know, that they are sort of units that are not allowed to be interfered with. So hacking is, of course, you know, the sort of the everyday term of this. That you know, hacking is this idea that you hack into a system or whatever. But already in hacking, there's sort of an ethical judgment going on because, of course. You know, the hackers usually say that we are constructive. You know, we're not like the crackers. The crackers are the ones who destroy things. We are the ones who build things. You know, so crackers build things, they say, and crackers are the ones who wants to steal your bank account number or whatever. You know, who's sort of evil. Yeah, and usually they're not here, are they? You know, it's never. You know, they're always somewhere else. They're always, you know, Russia. Or, you know, somewhere. You know, it's always when you read about it, it sounds like a sort of, you know, James Bond narrative that you know, crackers are always But the whole idea is that, you know, but of course this is really hard to sort of, to know what is cracking and what is hacking in a sense. Because of course you have to sort of crack into something in order to hack it very often. You have to sort of interfere with the system in order to sort of change it in a constructive way. You know, because it's not any type of building, and I'm not hacking in my Lego when I just build a normal Lego. You know, I have to sort of be a little more sort of ingenious with it. But okay, just going back to the history of hacking, which is also, you know, from MIT and this prank culture, but also the idea of I mean, like lockpicking and so on. You're fascinated by the system itself. You want to sort of master a system that you locked out of, in a sense. You know, so that I am not a locksmith, but I am going to learn to lockpick in order to sort of, you know, master my own locks in my own house. And I was at the hacker conference in Berlin in 2006, and there in the nights they have this sort of, you know, you sit there and make your own lock picks, and then sort of you start with small padlocks and things. And there was this guy, and he said, you know, that he was usually stopped at the airports because he had his bag full of these kind of locks and things, and the police would be like, oh, what's going on here? And he would be like, no, but they cannot understand that I'm interested in locks and not in doors. You know, because if you're a thief, you want to break up the door. You know, the lock is you know, you find, usually as a thief, you find better ways than standing lockpicking. You know, you go for a window or something else. But the whole idea is that, you know, that the system, that is a challenge for this, you know. But also that it shouldn't leave marks. You know, you shouldn't destroy it. You know, you shouldn't. So also, I mean, so subcultures like urban exploration, you know, where people sort of dig into the tunnels or look at catacombs or, you know, sneak on the roofs and so on. You know, this is from a book called Access All Areas by Ninjalicious, who ran an urban exploration scene for many years. That the whole idea is that, you know, that just like the Sierra Club here in the States, that, you know, take nothing but footprint, or sorry, take nothing but pictures and leave nothing but footprints. You know, that you should sneak in, but you should also not make your presence known in order to sort of make others be able to sort of see this. And Ninjalicious writes in this book about, you know, why is it that we go, you know, we fly to India or to Thailand or fantastic places, you know, and we have our Lonely Planet guys there just to sort of see if we've seen everything, and we meet all the other backpackers there, good or bad, you know, whatever, and we never really get into the airlock, actually, of the real culture, whatever. And at the same time, you know, we all do this. You know, we all go to see these exotic places that everyone has seen already, but probably nobody has seen the rooftop of this house, you know, or seen the catacombs underneath this house, you know. So why isn't it that we sort of explore what is actually around our own house, our own neighborhood? Why do we fly to other places far away to see what everyone else has seen, and we leave sort of our everyday actually unexplored? So the whole idea then, sort of, you know, how do you open these systems that are part of your everyday and sort of, you know, find sort of transparency in your everyday life? But to me, I think an interesting part of hacktivism too is that it's not only about that system, you know, and it's not only about, you know, sort of tearing down a system or something, you know, very sort of 68-ish sort of resistance that, you know, I should stop the machine, I should sabotage capitalism or something like that, you know, I should stop this working of this ugly computer machine, bad, whatever, you know. It's more about, you know, how do I empower certain energies in there that I agree with, while ignoring others, or trying to limit others. So I usually use examples like, that you should try to sort of keep the power on. A lot of hacktivism is trying to sort of, try to sort of dig into a system, but to sort of, grab onto an energy that is in there in order to sort of release it or liberate it. So there's something going on already in there, and you try to sort of, just, tune it a little, or sort of, make it take another path, an undesignated path, you could say, because design is in a sense to designate, to tell others, go this way. Otto uses an example of subways, that subway systems are perfectly designated by power, because, when they built the subway 100 years ago or whatever, still people move exactly in those tubes. They're not going to change them, they're not going to move them to another street or something. They totally dug into the infrastructure of the city, and that is totally the designated path. You go down there and either go that way or you go that way. It's very sort of, you cannot go that way or something like that. While hacking is trying to sort of find another way to move through the system. And an example of this sort of technological example can be the Barbie Liberation Organization that perhaps some of you have heard, and their action from the mid-90s where they bought Mattel toys speaking, or sort of, if you press G.I. Joe in the back, he says, kill, 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 or vengeance is mine. And when you press Barbie in the back, she says, let's go shopping, or math is hard, or let's plan our dream wedding, this kind of thing, what she was saying. And what they did was that they bought these toys just before the holiday season, and they changed it, opened them and changed the chips between the toys, and then put them back into the original packaging and put a little notice on saying that, if you think this toy is weird, or contact media or something like that. And then they put them back into Toys R Us, and happy family members who bought their toys for their kids, and the kids would open them, and then at Christmas they would press Barbie in the back, which is kill, 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 whatever. So they made their point really, really well. So they sort of subverted, in a sense, the gender stereotypes of these toys, and also highlighted how gender stereotypes are totally sort of programmed into our everyday toys. But they did this in a very sort of, they still spoke, they would actually use the gender stereotypes in order to make the point. They could have perhaps changed them to say, oh, don't make gender stereotypes. But the whole idea was that they actually just shifted them and used the power of the inherent problem to actually highlight the change, the problem itself. But they also did something, which I think is very, important part of hacktivism, is that they published the methods themselves. The whole idea was that others should do this too. That it wasn't sort of an artistic intervention that keeps agency with the makers themselves. But that the whole idea is that it's sort of an open source idea. It's something that you should also be able to do. So that whole idea behind this was that, in the sense of hacktivism, which is also part of this, that Wikipedia, Linux, open source program, all these have a sort of an imperative that you can also do this. You add comments to your programming lines in order for others to read them to understand what's going on. So that there's an idea that actually, by being able to have others reproduce these kind of systems, we actually open a wider part of society. And not only keeping some agency toward, for the artists, designers, or whatever, who's the engineers. And this sort of, resonates with very old ideas. Friedrich Fröbel, a German educator who started the kindergarten movement in the mid-19th century, had also this idea that, man only understands all of that which he was to produce. This whole kindergarten education is about getting sort of kids to do hands-on stuff. And this is, of course, this type of movement starts at the same time as public education starts in Europe too, and here in the States too. So that instead of only learning to read and do maths and sort of read and write, there's a big sort of emphasis that making things that have a sort of everyday use is just as important to be a full, worthy sort of citizen. That is just as important as being able to read the manual or whatever, sort of read what society tells us to do. But actually being able to sort of construct our own autonomy in a sense is part of education itself. And this brings back the idea of capabilities, which is something that Amartya Sen, the Nobel laureate from '98, I think, in economics, has been writing a lot about. And one of his big sort of distinctions is between capabilities and commodities. That from a sort of a GDP perspective, buying and selling stuff produces well-being or growth or whatever. But it doesn't say anything about the capabilities, what actually people are able to do. It tells something about transactions, economic transactions, but not really how people actually live their lives. So he was a big proponent of this kind of happiness index and global well-being indexes, and trying to look at other sort of other measuring instruments, other data than transactions, in order to measure growth or sort of well-being among people. he uses an example of a bike. And this is sort of, you know, the wet dream, this Puma bike, you know, which industrial designer wouldn't love to have one of these at home, you know. And, but the idea is that I can buy this bike and hang it on my wall, and it still counts as a sort of economic transaction. It still adds to our economic growth or whatever. But it doesn't say anything about how I can use this bike. The capability of biking is not counted in this transaction, and it's not seen in the bike itself. You know, me as a designer, I design this bike, and I just take for granted that people can bike, that there's whatever, you know, all these other systems people have, you know, pumps or whatever, you know, all these other systems that are surrounding this bike, but I just take for granted that they are there. So what Sen is talking about is sort of, you know, we have to take apart these capabilities and sort of, you know, what does it mean to actually utilize a bike? And it differs between internal capabilities, meaning, you know, your ability to actually use the bike that you can bike, but also external capabilities. The idea that there's bicycle lanes, so there's a safe environment for me to bike in. You know, that the city is perhaps fairly flat, or that my bicycle at least is adjusted, you know, to the environment in which I can use this bike. Also, you know, there's also, you know, from his position about India, the idea is also about, you know, what are the external capabilities in the sense of, you know, he's having a chapter on education for lower caste women, you know. You can educate many lower caste women, but as long as they're in a culture where men doesn't listen to lower caste persons and not women, you know, that's not going to produce much change. So you need to also be able to sort of engage with the cultural change around the capability you produce. So if the inner capability is education, you also need to create sort of a cultural change where that capability is realized, is allowed to flourish. So just the same, you know, I need to have a city where I can utilize my bike in order for my biking capability to flourish. You know? So I mean, but the whole idea is that is part of the design. That is not something that is distinct from, you know, something that is different from the bike itself. But, you know, how do you design a bike that actualizes these kind of capabilities? And this comes back to Martha Nussbaum, who has been writing a lot together with Amartya Sen, and this idea that capabilities are the basis of freedom. You know, what you're able to do and be is actually resonating with, you know, what you know, your position in society. And this means that, you know, for example, just taking the bike again, you know, if I can fix my bike, I have a choice I didn't have before. In the sense that, you know, if my bike was broken, I needed to go to the mechanic to get my bike fixed. But if I have the ability, the capability to actually fix my bike, I have a choice that I didn't have. And I can, you know, whatever. And I can actualize these in different ways, and I can actually have different values. You know, I can see fixing my bike as a sort of, you know, part of my well-being. You know, I like the feeling of having fixed my own tire, flat tire, for example, rather than having it, you know. And that's a quality I can choose, and if I don't have the capability, I cannot choose between those qualities either. So we can come back to this idea that skill is a sense of control of our everyday life. You know, that having the capability to interfere with your everyday systems is part of sort of a control mechanism. There's other, I mean, for example, Christopher Frayling has been writing a book called On Craftsmanship, which is also about sort of discussing this idea of sort of, you know, the evolution of crafts versus industrialism. And we usually think that the Luddites, or whatever these were destroying the machines in early industrialism, were sort of against machines. No, he means that, you know, they're against the loss of control. That suddenly, within industrialism, some people actually lose control of their working environment in order to sort of produce streamlined production facilities. So who has actually access, who controls the system? And you can go back to that in fashion, in a sense, because, you know, we can talk about democracy and a democratized system today, but do we have control of that system? No. You know, we can buy ourselves access to it. We can buy fashionable stuff, but we are not ourselves fashion-able. We do not get the ability to actually interfere. And I think this is really, I mean, coming back to you know, so is IKEA, is that do it yourself? Is IKEA empowering? Perhaps not, you know. You can build yourself through the whole IKEA warehouse and not turn yourself, you know, you're not becoming a carpenter, you're not becoming a cabinet maker, you know. You get very good at this little key, you know, and you sort of, you can build all these IKEA, follow the IKEA manuals, but you're not earning any skills. You know, you're not becoming a better builder of some sort. While, for example, on the other hand, if you start cooking, you know, if you use a cookbook and you start cooking at home, You don't know that in the morning there's a little Thai chef inside of you that just sort of wants to come out by lunch and make this tonkatsu, because actually for every recipe you cook, you actually reclaim part of the kitchen. So when you have cooked yourself through the whole cookbook, you actually are a better chef. And you can start improvising and these kind of things. But it's sort of, so saying that all these are sort of DIY or all that, they don't have the same capabilities. The idea with IKEA is that you sort of double-click Billy and it sort of materializes in your home. The whole idea is that reducing the amount of interference of skills or whatever, lessons you can learn. While for cooking, of course, it's sort of kept open. Okay, great. So just coming back to this, what do these capabilities do? There's a very nice book, just sort of just a quick reference from Jan Wolf and Anders Jafrit about fertile functionings. That some capabilities are more important than others, and some disadvantages are more corrupting than others. So, for example, domestic violence actually corrupts a lot of other capabilities. I may be reading, I may be having all kind of different education, whatever. But if I'm in an abusive relationship, I cannot actualize those because I live in a constant fear of my home, etc., etc. While some certain, fertile functionings are that, the more people I learn, get to know, and the better I become at sort of dealing with abstract concepts, and the more skills I earn, I actually can produce different things. I actually enrich my capabilities much more. So the question there is, how do you curate, in a sense, these capabilities? So you don't see capabilities as totally isolated. So bicycling is one, whatever, mechanics is one, whatever. But how do they come together in order to produce bigger capabilities rather than being isolated small parts? Another development practitioner, Nabil Hamdi, has been talking about the strategic objects. That how do we produce objects that actually actualizes assets, or human assets, or societal civic assets. That somehow, I still make mugs, this mugs or whatever, if I'm a potter or whatever. But how can this mug be part of a larger societal scheme where it employs homeless people or educates, whatever, produces fair labor conditions in the mines or whatever, could this? I still make mugs, but this mug is actually part of a much larger societal scheme or strategy, in a sense. That I invest. This mug is still what the probe, in a sense, that moves through all these different stations. But the whole idea is that I'm still a craftsman or whatever. I'm still doing my stuff. But the thing is that this actually is sort of very well curated in where in society it makes its journey. Is there a recycling service, and that recycling service actually employs people that, it's part of a sort of a larger scheme. I've been trying to apply this in a project like community repair. I did a project in London with the London Culture Fashion where the master students had to start with a broken garment or a garment that needed repair, and they had to sort of fix it, but they weren't allowed to do it themselves, and they had to use their neighbors, and they weren't allowed to pay for it. So the whole idea was that they had to sort of set up a little sort of, a social organization in order to get their garment fixed, but at the same time produce unique site-specific values, in a sense. That repair was not about getting things back into its original shape, but actually adding a value that the repair situation actually produces or repairs a social fabric, or whatever you say. So, for example, Benedict here, he had his father's shirt that was broken, and he found a community center where he lived, where these ladies had a hat making course. So they transformed his father's shirt into a hat, and he sort of paid back by taking portrait photographs of them and sort of gave them back. And this is sort of part of the exhibit in the end. So the idea was that this hat, sort of this transformation of the hat, then actually produced sort of a social relationship with the producers. Emily here, she was commuting to her parents every weekend or every second weekend to Paris. So on the Eurostar, this train that goes under the canal, or channel, sorry, she engaged the people on the train to embroider this coat, and add these patches and things. So actually they produced this coat together during her commute. Renee, he or she had the lining fixed on her trench coat, and out of all these pieces, we also found a community center that had a sewing class. And she had it exhibited in Bethnal Green, where she lives, at the Museum of Childhood. And this coat was then exhibited there for 2 weeks, and then auctioned off, and all the money went back to the community center that produced the lining. So everybody tries to organize a scheme in which the repair service itself sort of produce the social relationships. And yeah, she added also the postcode. Another way to look at this is sort of the fashion codes, in a sense, and this sort of comes back then to technology. You know, so what are a book like this by Roland Barthes, a French thinker, he was talking about sort of fashion codes, and then dress codes are different ways so we can sort of decipher clothing by looking at their codes. And he uses examples, very simple ones, that you can actually decipher if an open collar or closed collar or something would mean different things, more sporty or more tight or whatever. But the idea would be that could we talk about codes in different ways? Could we imagine that these codes are actually almost like algorithms in a sense, almost like chess moves or something, So that could we imagine that actually dress codes would be, literally codes in a sense? So I had this idea of using oversized T-shirts where we actually made a sort of this is a chess program. So could you make like 64 squares on a T-shirt? And then as all sort of fashion students, they have draping classes, So could you have an XX or 4XL T-shirt and then drape it, as in draping class, and use a safety pin or something, and write down the coordinates. So you would write down G5 to B6 or something like that, just like you would do in chess annotations. But the whole idea was that this shirt then would be a sort of a hardware that everyone would have in their wardrobe, and the fashion code itself was almost like a software. That was a program. You could actually program a shirt, a T-shirt, in the way you would drape it. So the students were writing down the codes that they were using, and then we sort of produced sort of almost as like a sort of a fake programming language, where we sort of imagined how we program this T-shirt to produce these kind of very exquisite garments. But perhaps we could also have sort of a tweak, we could have a sort of a very short version of this programming language. So, Karl Lagerfeld wakes up in the morning and goes, oh, A5 to B6, and he just tweets it out, and everybody says, oh shit, they fix their T-shirts in this, And also everyone can sort of, start modifying this too, of course, because everybody has the hardware, the T-shirt at home, so it's very easy to sort of rewrite these codes. If you want, you can give them very sort of poetic chess names, like, the Nims of Indian Defense, or the Kaiser Opening, but all these, you just have very sort of poetic names, something so you can sort of invent your own moves, whatever. And so, we tried out different versions of this and tried out what you could do with a T-shirt and sort of, how big it should be. So the idea here, just to sort of bring it back to technology, is in a sense that technology is not in the garment. It's not that it's LEDs and batteries and all these sort of things, but what is, where does technology, on what layer of clothing does technology exist? Usually in fashion education, you talk about sort of smart fibers, or that, textile engineers talk about the knitting machines and all these very smart machines to produce fabric. That is, it's itself a little stupid, whatever you say. But where, so why, where does the layers of technology start and end? And how do we sort of employ social media in the sense that that be a technology, but the garment still be stupid? So the idea here is sort of, so how do you write a sort of a programming language, a very simple one that still enables people to write their own code and learn to code and learn to sort of drape, and the entrance level, you don't even need to know how to sew on a sewing machine and whatever these kind of things. So the idea here is then, how do you sort of disseminate tools that people can be using in order to sort of produce smarter whatever, fashion. So, but this is a very sort of, at the same time, I think, here it comes to some words of caution, which I think is where I want to sort of end this. Because I have a feeling that very often in a lot of the design groups that I have been teaching, this social design and collaborative design is all good. All collaborations are good. All participation is basically good. We want to sort of participate. We want to have everyone engaged and so on. But is it always good, or how do we become more careful about what we're doing here? I've been in the jury of several projects I know in Sweden at least, where students have worked with sort of industrial farming or cows, that, we're going to make some milking equipment to cows here, whatever. And then sort of, the cows, they cannot sit down because they're too big, so we have to make it, so they all try to sort of add small band-aids to a problem that is actually totally corrupt, totally unethical way we treat our animals, basically, But at the same time, designers are coming, let's do a little of this and a little of that, we try to sort of fix it a little here and so on, So how do we sort of become more aware of the ethics of the engagements we're actually participating in? Because usually we're very good at questioning the brief when it's very technical, design a new car, or do you really need a car or do you need transport? You know, that's sort of a classical, you know, oh, we try to sort of expand the problem. But very often I feel that as designers engaging with social issues, we have much more problems seeing who's actually used or not. And I think an example like Gmail is perfect with this, you know. It's very user-friendly. It's fantastic. You know, I'm offered this free Gmail, you know, 15 gigabytes of mails, but at the same time, I know somehow that Google has more, more use of my information than I have use of their, you know, of the service itself. You know, that there's some sort of asymmetry. I don't know what they are doing with my data. And of course, the whole Snowden affair has really pinpointed this, but I think the whole idea here is that we sign a lot of agreements where we actually do not know what's really going on here. So there's a total asymmetry. I will never know what Google does with this. You know, I will never be able to know if I'm actually used. You know, and who is? I mean, when you design these user engagements, who is actually used here? And I think today, especially, I realize from my school, there's a lot of win-win situations. But there, you know, who is really, you know, of course there can be, I mean, it's not a zero-sum game, but aren't we also shifting at the same time just to, you know, someone else is losing here, but that is not a third part in this win-win situation? We should just be more careful here, you know, who is actually the user and how do we avoid using people in this sense? At the same time, there's also problems of sort of a local perspective and a systemic perspective. Johan Söderberg, a Swedish researcher, has been writing about the 3D, the rec wrap, or 3D printers. And the problem here of empowerment, I have a 3D printer at home, and I can print anything. It's fantastic. You know, look at this. You know, I can print whatever, my furniture, whatever, you know, oh, it's great, or whatever. And I have the mean, I mean, a lot of the sort of the argument here is like, wow, the modes of production, the means of production are at my desk, you know, this is a total Marxist dream, you know, every worker is now empowered and not working for capital or whatever, it's fantastic. At the same time, it is, of course, the total wet dream of a capitalist. Having a 3D printer in everyone's home perfectly enables me to constantly push down the prices, because there will never be a union of 3D printer owners or something like that. No, I mean, people, you know, there will always be someone printing at a lower cost. So actually, the more we actually facilitate this kind of democratic production, the more we undermine a fair wage possibility to actually live on the practices that these tools enable. So that, you know, the more we share, the more open design, the more stuff we put up there, the more we undermine the possibility to actually live on that production. Which means that, you know, we have to live on other things. You know, I give away my music and I try to sell the concert. You know, all this, you know, that I think you've been reading this, I'm not gadgets in these books, but whatever, you know. So this is not also part of that, but it actually taps directly into design itself. It's not something that only happens in music or somewhere else. It's really about how we produce things and how we will get paid for them. And to Johan Söderberg, he's very sort of skeptical about, you know, he definitely means that, you know, yeah, this type of local empowerment is actually very often used in total disempowerment. That what looks locally empowering is systemically disempowering. Another part of this is in a sense of what values are behind this. What engagement is in social practice, social design, what are the values that we sort of reproduce? Very often, you know, a lot of social design happens in developing countries and so on, but what is really the values that happen underneath there? You know, what is really, of course, every sort of cultural institute and so on is supporting practices that are supporting the values of that country, but still, you know, what is really going on here? Is that, are we just reproducing more consumers in different countries? Is that really what we're trying to do? Or what is sort of the empowerment we're looking for in these kind of engagements? And this I want just to sort of come back, because this is where the morning ends. And this is where I think is, you know, where does collaboration turn into collaboration in the wrong sense? Collaboration in the sense working with the enemy. Being a collaborateur in French is one who worked with the Nazis during the occupation times. That you are just collaborating a little bit too much. You actually, and of course, every occupation, every sort of, you know, imperialist endeavor needs collaborations. You know, you cannot occupy a country if everyone is against you. And that's of course the whole idea of Gandhi's resistance to you know, turn around the civil population against the British imperialists. But the idea here is, you know, how do we avoid being actually collaborating with the wrong forces? And one example of this could be, for example, you know, a lot of socially engaged design and so on. We look at, for example, community gardens as a very good example of this. Very often that sort of comes in here, or in my experience. And there's also cynicism going on there, because very often a community garden is part of a sort of gentrification endeavor, even if it's not, it feels locally empowering to the people growing their carrots, but it raises the property prices of someone else, which means that the local people who actually did the growing are the ones who have to move. So how do we become much more clever in the sense of engaging also with the policy level, for example? Should there be a certain contract written with when you have a community garden in order to share the profits, for example? How do we become more clever in order to avoid actually becoming collaborators with the wrong type of forces, with the forces that we did not actually want to support? And I think we need to be much more sort of, pro-actionary in a sense, to sort of feel, that these ethics are part of our social endeavors. And of course you can say that in the worst sense, you're sort of a quisling. If someone actually sells out the whole endeavor, you sell out your country totally to the occupying force. But hopefully we're not going there. But I think it's just, we need to sort of also be careful in the end of who, when we talk about co-authorship, co-design, all this sort of, that there is actually a possibility of exactly what I'm saying. And some argument is that, well, can we see this? Can we only recognize this afterwards? Can we only recognize it after the war is ended or something? No, not necessarily. We can actually, as designers, produce much more sort of utopian stances in order to secure our ethics in a sense. That how do we, if I'm going to design a scheme for community gardening, how do I then, what is the utopian version of this so we have something more to sort of, more on the negotiation table that is much more ethical in a sense. So how do we sort of expand the action fields towards more ethical solutions if we engage with others? I hope that made sense. It was a long sort of, but it ended up with a little warning of the tools that we actually release when we work together. Okay. Any questions? Do you have time for questions? Is it?
Yeah, we have time.
Yeah.
I was wondering, when we're trying to shift the system, especially when we're talking about capitalism, you kind of have to work with the system in order to make changes. It's like you can believe contrary to the principles of capitalism, but you still have to live in. So how can you leverage that? How can you work within the system to change it without buying into it?
Yeah, exactly. And you can say that, if you look at fashion in that example, you can say, how quickly did punk become a lifestyle that you would buy? Sort of what was an attitude perhaps first, immediately got commodified and became part of a system that you would sort of buy into in a sense. I think to me, also falling back on Johan Söderberg, I think he has an interesting argument in the sense that, of course, a lot of what was before hacking endeavors have become different sort of commercial arenas. That what were before sort of, as soon as you start picking locks, there will be the lock picking site or whatever we would sell stuff or whatever, as soon it will be commodified. But what he says that, well, if you move towards, the capabilities actually, what is actually the skills that people learn here, then they can be misused. They can be used for other purposes than what the market says they should be used to. So there's actually a very good, but of course that has to, there also has to be words of caution there, but in the sense that, a capability is much harder to commodify than a lifestyle or something that is just sort of a very local application or something. So the idea there, from Johan Söderberg's perspective, is that hackers has an edge in the sense that they can constantly move on. They can constantly, with the skill sets they have, they can constantly apply them to new frontiers. While if they only did one thing, or if they only did sort of a lifestyle thing, that would be eaten up or eaten up. But it would very quickly lose that sort of edge it had. So to me, I think looking at if you do sort of a community engagement, what do people leave with? What is the skill they actually actualize? And how do you make sure that people leaving your workshop, your project, or whatever, are actually more skilled than they were when they came? So how do you avoid them being used for a sort of a scheme that you cannot totally control, but at least they leave with skills that they can employ for something else? That at least they have that power to sort of apply it somewhere else. That you have not sort of controlled the sort of the territory or the area where they can employ their skills. So when you make, two user-friendly sort of bricks or whatever that stick together, they can only be used within that certain system. In a lot of